Part 6 of X. There Was a Man, the Saga of Gordon Kahl, a True Story. Page 30, Chapter 6, Posse. Around the Crane, Odessa area where they lived, many of the meetings concerned the public schools during 1973. This drew Kahl family interest, as they had 4 children in school. Some parents took their children out of the corrupt schools, but not my family. Yori and Fred did quit high school, though. It had something to do with their civics class. Grandpa was managing a steaming operation in the oil fields. Since he had taught the boys how to operate the steamers, they went right to work. The tax meetings continued. A group in Odessa had learned of the sheriff's posse comitatus, so they started having meetings and selected Grandpa to be the Texas coordinator. Posses were nothing new in Texas, being frequent in the Wild West days. Grandpa explained to me that posse comitatus simply means power of the county. Old English common law defines the posse as all able-bodied males between the ages of 15 and 45. The reeve of the shire, a highly respected person selected by the people, eventually became known as the sheriff. In the U.S., the sheriff is the executive of the county and the only elected enforcement office in the U.S. other than constables. Thus, the posse is a local affair only, not a state or national organization. They are usually formed by the sheriff when needed, but some believe the Federal Posse Comitatus Act, enacted about 1878, authorized the sheriff only to be notified when the law is being violated. Violations of the supreme law, that is, the Constitution, is what concerns the modern posse. Grandpa pondered, who, other than indignant groups of citizens, is to protest lawlessness of government bodies and officials? Who else is to oppose unjust and illegal and oppressive laws? The Posse Comitatus movement contended that our entry into the war was contrived. When Gordon Kahl came to the same conclusion years later, he blamed FDR as the culprit who led us into war. Unfortunately, the Posse Comitatus movement had been started by Mike Beach in Oregon. The Silver Shirts had protested in the countries entering the war. Naturally, Beach was branded as a traitor, and the posse got a bad name. The Posse Comitatus started its recent thrust in 1969 in opposition to the Vietnam protesters in Oregon. One report was that a brigadier general headed the new awakening. In 1983, Jim Wickstrom of Tigerton, Wisconsin, weak on facts but full of desire to be helpful, claimed to be a national director of counterinsurgency for Posse Comitatus, and became so vocal during the Gordon Kahl manhunt that he became a federal target and victim. Laverne Donald Hollenbeck of Portland, Oregon, is identified as the commander-in-chief. Such national tags may be used to encourage formation of citizen groups or for communication and education, but no legitimate authority exists over local groups. About this time, the Justice Department, prompted by federal agents, branded Posse Comitatus officially as domestic terrorists. The FBI overtly denies that it investigates any organization, as the right of free speech and assembly, even for communists, is protected by the Constitution. No one has been able to identify any posse members in Arkansas, even though Hollenbeck says they exist. The Posse Comitatus is viewed by the Federals as militant tax protesters. They say if tax is illegal, why shouldn't it be protested? The Posse Comitatus concept was established upon the Magna Carta provisions, where the people have the power. In California, however, one posse leader caused a group to get a black eye to its reputation. The group was assisting farmers in keeping Cesar Chavez's labor union organizers from coming onto the property and disrupting work in 1975. The courts had specified at which non-work times during the day membership solicitations could be made. Only 2 entrances existed for the farm. The posse was armed. The organizers repeatedly rushed the cable barricaded lane and then stopped 3 feet short, backing off. Many law enforcement officers were also at the scene. Francis Gillings was the leader of the group. He was a diabetic prone to neglect towards taking his insulin and eating correctly. He had helped establish posses throughout the U.S. Gillings became chemically and thus mentally unbalanced, even though a friend was bringing him fresh fruit to restore his sugar balance. Old Betsy, his shotgun, will go a long way. Pull back, he exclaimed, insanely ignoring wise counsel. His gun discharged. The generated hostile national publicity for the posse. This generated hostile national publicity for the posse. The United Farm Workers Union was endorsed by the Catholic Church, the AFL-CIO, and minority rights organization, according to the newspaper report I have. Government officials are properly concerned that anarchists do not displace a government of law at any time or at any place. The vigilantes, constitutionalists, are concerned that government does not violate the rights of the people. Both viewpoints have plenty of merit. Grandpa explained that patriots insist upon strict adherence to the law, while anarchists disregard the law. The townspeople were discussing the issue one day when I went into the store. A semantics game of sorts wages between government bureaucrats and the modern-day patriots. With the amazing and overwhelming support of the mass media, patriots, instead of being called reactionaries, are branded right-wing radicals. Instead of the populace relying on the posse comitatus as their protection against government oppression and tyranny, it is viewed disparagingly. Some of this is reinforced by self-appointed spokesmen making wild, unfounded statements or violating the law by unnecessarily procuring automatic weapons and other illegal weapons, unartfully challenging the law's validity. One speaker commented, "A man named Snell foolishly killed a highway patrolman near Mena, Arkansas, when stopped with firearms in his van. He reportedly had been harassed after the Medina shootout. He was an admitted survivalist." The dialogue continued. As a spin-off of such anomalies, anyone who stores a cache of food these days and owns firearms is branded a survivalist. In a demeaning way. Truth is, we all want to survive. The government would be wise to recognize the defensive posture of these patriotic fundamentalist citizens. Even though potential enemies and a Russian invasion may be figments of their imagination, they plan no aggressive action. All parties realize that a comparison with federal firepower is that of a BB gun against a Sherman tank. Old Man Dunn explained. Nevertheless, some of these frightened citizenry listen to Abe Lincoln literally when he says, "This country with its institutions belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of it, they can exercise the existing right of amending it, or their revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it." Gun control laws diminish the last possibility as they are increasingly tightened. The IRS is going to start recording gun transactions, says the TV. I finished my shopping and left, thinking about the conversation. When I arrived home, I rummaged through my notes. The press is considered the natural adversary of government. According to one reporter, Jefferson said, "If I had to choose between government and newspapers, I would choose newspapers." But it seems the press, constitutionalists would say the establishment press, is now more like a PR agent for those in power. The Northern Lights glimmer puts it well. John Swinton, one of the best-loved newspapermen in the United States, the dean of his profession, when asked for a toast before the New York Press Club, is quoted as saying, "There is no such thing at this debate of the world's history in America as an independent press. You know it, and I know it. There is not one of you who dares to write your honest opinions, and if you did, you know beforehand that it would never appear in print. I am paid weekly for keeping my honest opinion out of the paper I am connected with. Others of you are paid similar salaries for similar things, and any one of you who would be so foolish as to write honest opinions would be out on the streets looking for another job. If I allowed my honest opinions to appear in one issue of my paper before 24 hours of my occupation would be gone. The business of the journalist is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. You know it, and I know it. And what folly is this toasting an independent press? We are the tools and the vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings, we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. A sad commentary on the Fourth Estate, I'd say. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. As Reverend Martin Niemöller said, in Germany the Nazis came for the communist, and I didn't speak up because I was not a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up because I am not a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I was a Protestant, so I didn't speak up. Then they came for me. By that time, there was no one to speak up for anyone. I'm sure everyone was just following orders. Alexander Solzhenitsyn made similar statements about Russia. Hey, supper's about ready. I wonder if Scarlett and Larry will get back home from town in time. Chapter 7, IRS. Grandpa Gordon appeared on TV one night, along with another posse member, W.M. Reinhardt. He explained what the posse really was like and protested federal direct taxes on individuals. Grandma says the next day, 250 men in Dallas just quit paying into the IRS. The predictable response from McCandless, IRS District Director, was to tell his IRS agents, I want you to go stomp on those bastards. Let me read that again. The predictable response from McCandless, IRS District Director, was to tell his agents, quote, I want you to go stomp on those bastards, end quote. IRS special agents carry guns and usually travel in pairs to confront a person. The IRS can get anyone. Congressmen are scared to death of them. It is an unbridled agency out of control. Republican George Hanson of Idaho wrote a book to harass our people attacking IRS abuses. The IRS then attacked him, underhandedly, of course. He's no longer in Congress, but continues his battle with the IRS. His book cover reads, Law-breaking government at all levels jails ministers, makes fugitives of women and children, rigs juries, conducts illegal wiretaps, and spends billions to send innocent citizens to jail. So the IRS started in on Grandpa again. In Heaton, he received a summons to report to court in December 1976 at Midland, Texas. Grandma says he could have skipped out that time too, but naively thought the Constitution would protect him. He and Grandma drove down. My grandpa was put under bond, restricting him to the district. Grandma returned here to her beloved Heaton homestead alone to care for her children. At year's end, Grandma went back for the trial, which ended February 12, 1977. Although convicted, Grandpa then went back to Heaton and Grandma until April. Then Grandma and her youngest, Aunt Lorene, worked for relatives at a truck stop, while my granddad was undergoing psychiatric evaluation at Springfield, Missouri by a court order. Grandpa was released on June 30th and came home. He continued attending tax protest meetings, never speaking. The crowds were growing in size, noticeably larger. Grandpa was charged by an information, not an indictment, illegally unsupported by an affidavit of probable cause, of willfully failing to file tax returns for 1973 and 1974 under Title 26, which is not part of the Criminal Code, Title 28. The U.S. Code indicates on the title page that Title 26 Internal Revenue Code has not been enacted into law. My grandpa's primary defense was that he was a victim of selective prosecution and that his religious beliefs prohibited him from filing returns. His attorney, Buford Terrell, did not emphasize grandpa's beliefs that the Constitution protected him from being required to file. He was found guilty on both counts on April the 4th, 1977. The case was appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court, where the decision was affirmed on November the 16th, 1978. It was published in 583 F. 2nd, 1351, 1978. The appeals court found that the IRS had a policy of selective prosecution, and cited that the 14th Amendment would be violated if based on an improper motive, but that Kahl had not presented a colorable case. The court also determined that no statute requiring him to file need to be cited in the information, that he should have objected to absence of affidavit during the trial, that it was not an infamous crime requiring a grand jury, that his religious beliefs of the law's invalidity did not negate willfulness, and that requiring him to provide copies of his returns during probation was proper, not involuntary servitude. The conviction was upheld. Grandpa worked as an accountant while in prison. On one count, Grandpa was sentenced to federal prison camp at Leavenworth, Kansas. Upon his arrival, a female staff member indicated to him that he should not have been sent there. A tax misdemeanor didn't belong there. She assured him he would go elsewhere when she got it straightened out. After not hearing from her, he sought her out. Her response was that she had been told emphatically to keep her nose out of this case if she liked her job. According to Grandpa, he was there from February 1st until August the 8th, 1979. Now mark this. Grandpa didn't plead not guilty as the records show. He entered no plea at all. His special appearance notice said that he appears specially and not generally, and I object to the jurisdiction of this court over the subject matter and over my person, and therefore refuse to plead. He challenged the court's jurisdiction. It was ignored, as was his choice of counsel. The tree which was to bear the poisonous fruit in future years was the sentence on count 2. It was destined to cause misery and death to many, and to cost taxpayers a huge sum. The sentence was 1 year imprisonment and $2,000, execution suspended, and Kahl placed on probation for 5 years with supervision. Probation to begin upon the release from confinement under count 1. Probation under terms and conditions of probation 12-26-72, and on the following special conditions. Defendant is to divorce himself from organizations advocating willful disobedience of any local, state, or federal laws, and refrain from public displays of any nature connected with these organizations during this probationary period. The defendant will furnish the probation office with a copy of his income tax return at the appropriate time for filing. Another man, W.M. Reinhardt, also appeared on the 30-minute telecast that fateful night. The judge termed the two cases to be companions. Reinhardt was sentenced to a prison in Safford, Arizona. Before much time elapsed, he had a heart attack in the prison. Fellow prisoners pleaded with the guards to get medical help and gave Reinhardt mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to no avail. After a few hours, he died. Gordon fervently believed that the authorities induced the heart attack by some drug or other. Had the illness not have been induced, they would have given him treatment. He also genuinely suspected the same fate faced him were he to return to prison a second time. Grandpa's psychiatric examination indicated that he was deeply religious and without psychosis, but that he did have some schizoid features. Who doesn't? A clinical psychologist remarked that in the Context used, this meant he was inclined to be a loner rather than a social mixer. He had an intense belief held for 10 years that the IRS is a sinful, evil organization against his religion. He had a deep personal commitment and wrote the IRS telling them so. At the sentencing, his attorney argued, "We on the defense faced a difficult decision because no one can say where one man's religion stops and another man's insanity begins. I do feel that in the case, this man had such a strong commitment that his actions were totally governed. He was a man without choice in it. And I would show also that it was not his activities in breaking the law that brought him before this court. He did not pay taxes from 1969 forward. He wrote the Internal Revenue Service and says, 'I can't pay them. It's sinful to pay them.' He is here because he appeared on television for 30 minutes. Jerry Stamps of the IRS testified that given another man with the same factual situation, earning wages of under $10,000 and not appearing on television, that person would not be prosecuted. The court, Mr. Kahl, may I hear from you, sir?" I don't think I can do the court. "Mr. Kahl, may I hear from you, sir?" "I don't think I can add too much to it, Your Honor. That pretty well covers it. I felt I had a choice to make. I realized I could be cast into prison here, or I could spend an eternity in the lake of fire. It seemed to me that the choice of the two would have to be whatever punishment I had to receive here. That's all I have to say." Judge D.W. Suttle expressly denied that the sentence in any way infringed on Gordon's First Amendment rights of free speech. The judge displayed symptoms of senility. For example, in court he once stated that he was departing for a long vacation on that day and shortly thereafter told the clerk to make an appointment for him with someone for Monday. Following his release from prison, Gordon was on good terms with probation officer John Noah, who visited his home in North Dakota. He completed the monthly forms until Holliday took over his case. This Holliday did not have the sap and spunk of the infamous Doc Holliday of the Old West, who shotgunned a Clanton gang member in the gunfight at the OK Corral at Tombstone, as you will soon learn. After his probation file was transferred to Bismarck from Fargo, Gordon concluded that since he could not in good conscience comply with the income tax return portion of the probation requirements, it was useless to comply with any of them. When a U.S. Marshal asked him why he didn't send the monthly reports in, Grandpa retorted, "Why should I? They just send me back to prison anyway, so why fool with it?" Judge Suttle, in attempting to coerce Grandpa, had in fact delivered a life sentence to him for a misdemeanor. It is ironic to note a 1985 case in the First Circuit Court of Appeals. In Aitken, the court said, "In determining whether to file income taxes as willful, it is one's subjective state of mind that must be judged. We draw from all these cases the rather clear inference that willfulness in criminal tax prosecutions is subjective. Whether the defendant's beliefs about the legality of his actions were right or wrong, reasonable or unreasonable, is irrelevant to willfulness. The only issue is whether those beliefs were in fact held." 755 F2D 188. Grandpa contended that the court might well have added that if the beliefs were anchored to a decision of the Supreme Court, the beliefs would be buttressed further. The amazing fact is that the decision followed the U.S. Attorney's admonition to the tribunal. Washington says they can't afford to lose this case. Anyway, the current trend toward more acquittals is a tad late to help Gordon. Grandpa felt that the modern-day Minutemen do not contest the government's right to tax for proper government functions, while at the same time being concerned that government is much too big and expensive. Author Godfrey once said that he was proud to pay taxes in the U.S., but he would be just as proud for half the money. Protesters like him say that they are called illegal tax protesters because they protest illegal taxes. They contend that Federal Reserve Bank fiat paper notes are not dollars, as dollars are measured by precious metals. A dollar is a unit of measure like an inch. The federal government is prohibited from directly taxing individuals. Such must be appointed to the states in ratio to their population. Amendment 16 was never properly ratified, a fraud by Secretary Knox. Even if it were valid, it pertained only to corporations. Wages compensation are a quid pro quo exchange for labor, so no gain or profit exists that can be taxed. Wages are an income source, not taxable. It is not a proper government function to plunder those who work in order to give it to those who don't work. Benevolence requires volunteerism. Tax returns require a waiver of the Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights of testifying against oneself are an invasion of privacy. Income is profit or gain. The IRS is a private corporation, not part of the government, and it mistreats people. No statute requires a person to file a return. The tax is voluntary. These and many other arguments of Kahl and other patriots are rooted in the Constitution. Courts generally consider the arguments all frivolous, but then maybe they have a vested interest in seeing to it that the government troughs are full. Many of these growing numbers of protesters stand ready to go to jail, if need be, like my grandpa Kahl, for their ideals. A Penthouse magazine article in April of '84 by J. Cummings and E. Volkman was entitled, "No Deposit, No Return." Part of it concerned Gordon Kahl. They quote an IRS official. "The service likes to pretend that they got the thing under control, but to tell the truth, they're scared shit less. They know there is no way to beat a wide-scale, well-organized tax protest movement, whose members, in effect, look you straight in the eye and say, 'Look, you want to put me in jail? Okay, go ahead. I ain't going to pay you 1 red cent anyway. What do? Shoot 'em?' They shot Grandpa, so who knows? In contrast, I think most Americans are so terrorized by the awesome arsenal of weapons wielded by the IRS and are so worried about their own personal problems that they are not about to challenge Uncle Sam. Regardless of their beliefs, they quietly submit, some to 'it's the law' propaganda, others to cowardice or pragmatism. I decided to note such comments and put it with the data I was collecting. Seems to me they'd tax consumption or something rather than destroy people's incentive to work and abolish the horrible IRS. Former IRS Commissioner T. Coleman Andrews said, "I believe that a better way to raise revenue must be found because the present system is leading us right back to the very tyranny for which those who established this land of freedom risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to forever free themselves." Grandpa knew all of this. On the average, about 120 persons are jailed each year on income tax charges of all types. A little over 2 per state. IRS makes a lot of noise with each case, seeking maximum publicity. A poll of jurors in the Aitken case indicated that the tax protesters' exoneration was 90% attributed to the district judge instructions to the jury concerning willfulness. It's a good bet that when the convictions occur, which is more often than not, jury instructions are again the key item. For this reason, the consensus among the constitutionalists is that their only hope is to educate the potential jurors to the principle of jury nullification. I got to stick a personal commentary in. This book was written in 1991. Man, we're talking about all this same stuff in 2019. For this reason, the consensus among the constitutionalists is that their only hope is to educate the potential jurors to the principle of, quote, jury nullification. One document used to do this is the Handbook for Jurors. This explains the principle which trial judges take great pains to hide. Juries have the right to try the law as well as to determine factual guilt or innocence. Let me quote the portion I underlined. You, as a juror, armed merely with the knowledge of what a common law jury really is, if you feel the statute involved in any criminal case being tried by you is unfair, or that it infringes upon the defendant's natural God-given, inalienable, or constitutional rights, you must affirm that the offending statute is really no law at all, and that the violation of it is no crime at all. For no man is bound to obey an unjust command, which means if the defendant has disobeyed some man-made criminal statute and the statute itself is unjust, that defendant has committed no crime. Jurors, having ruled then on the justice of the law involved and finding it opposed in whole or in part to their own natural concept of what is basically right, are bound to hold for the acquittal of said defendant. The charge to the jury in the first jury trial before the Supreme Court of the U.S. illustrates the true power of the jury. In the February term of 1794, the Supreme Court conducted a jury trial in the case of the state of Georgia versus Brailsford et al. 3 DALL.1. It is presumed that the juries are the best judges of facts. It is, on the other hand, presumed that the courts are the best judges of law. But still, both objects are within your power of decision, emphasis added. You have the right to take upon yourselves to judge both and to determine the law as well as the fact in controversy. It goes on to explain that the juror is the judge in a criminal matter and should not be persuaded against his conscience or better judgment to vote guilty by fellow jurors. As jurors, you have the prerogative of nullification if circumstances seem to warrant. Grandpa did not think he was legitimately on probation after the first year following prison. How can you be on probation for a longer period than your sentence? Where does the Constitution give the federal government the right to put any citizen on probation? The federal government has only those powers delineated in the Constitution, and this is not one of them. It is usurpation, cut and dried, Grandpa contended. Certainly Judge Suttle knew he was sentencing Grandpa to an impossibility, to do acts contrary to his conscience. Grandpa was perturbed, and he was tried under Title 26, Section 7203 of the Internal Revenue Code, but was sentenced under Title 18, the Criminal Code, for tax evasion, or something for which he was not tried. He said, if you have enough money, you can fight them. If you can find the rare lawyer who will take them on, I need a Christian lawyer who will fight for my First Amendment religious rights. But any lawyer who prevails in doing this will soon be disbarred. It has happened many times. Grandpa ordinarily didn't have enough money even to pay attention. Really, I'm not a philosopher like Little Orphan Annie. These big words and ideas I sometimes use are fed to me by Gordon's friends. I have a hard enough time just getting by in high school, but I guess by now you're beginning to get the gist of the story. In the next part, we'll pick up on page 43, chapter 8, Memories.